For more insight, let's speak now with James Ockey. He's an associate professor of political science and international relations at University of Canterbury. Professor, Pita's second nomination rebuffed even before a vote could happen. How concerned are you that this could spark renewed political instability in the country?
Well, I think we really need to wait until the weekend to see just how much these protests are going to expand. So far, they're relatively small, but they're in downtown Bangkok and they're in the second largest city in Chiang Mai as well. So there is the potential for them to spread more widely. The other question, of course, is what happens next, and whether we get instability may depend to some degree on what comes next.
Well, given that Mr. Pita was the nominee from the party that won the most seats, the fact that Thailand's parliament barred him from running for prime minister undermines the people's choice, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And we've seen the institutions that were supposed to be independent, that were appointed by the military junta, step forward and block his path to the prime ministership. First, the Election Commission, which reported out surprisingly quickly on its investigation into his holding of shares. And did it right before the vote, and then the Constitutional Court following by accepting that case quite quickly as well, and just before this second vote. So even the timing of these supposedly independent institutions sort of shows the junta's hand in trying to block Mr. Pita from the prime ministership.
Professor, Mr. Pita said that he respected the court order and he bid parliamentarians farewell, saying that until we meet again. What did you make of his message? Is this a sign of concession?
It's an interesting approach. He has 2 weeks, 15 days actually, to put together a defense, and then they will consider the case. In some ways, it's strikingly similar to the case against Mr. Thanaton from the predecessor Future Forward Party after the last election, which was also about media shares in a media company that wasn't actually producing any media. But there is a significant difference here, too, in that Pita is the executor for his father's will. And so it's not clear whether that comprises ownership or just management of these shares on behalf of the estate, and how the court might rule around that. So there is a chance that he will manage to come back and get his MP seat back, but that's not going to get him back into the position of prime minister.
So what do you see happening next? It's a clear run for a Pheu Thai candidate to become prime minister, perhaps?
Well, it's not a clear run, and they have a very difficult decision to make, especially given the decision of the parliament that you can only propose a candidate once. They have 3 candidates they can propose. One is seen as the preferred candidate and the strongest candidate, Mr. Pheu Thai, but they have to take a risk if they put forward Mr. Pheu Thai. And there are some senators already who are insisting they will not vote for a prime minister of any coalition that includes Move Forward. And so it's possible that Pheu Thai could also struggle to get enough votes from the Senate as long as Move Forward is in the coalition. And that complicates decision-making for Pheu Thai. It's also possible they can get enough votes from the Senate. After all, Pheu Thai is much more politically experienced. They've been a party for a long time. They have good relationships with a lot of people in parliament and outside parliament who are powerful. And so there's a fair chance they can keep Move Forward in the coalition and still name the prime minister. But it's far from a certainty.
If, let's say, that the attempt to pitch a Pheu Thai candidate fail, what would it mean for the 8-party coalition? And is there a possibility that Pheu Thai could break away from Move Forward and cut a deal with military-linked parties?
There's 2 things to keep in mind there. If they can't name a prime minister from either of the 2 largest parties, then we sort of end up in a stalemate where it's difficult to see how anybody can step forward as prime minister. That would really leave two possibilities. One is a change to a new coalition, which could happen. And I would point out that it's theoretically possible to have a coalition led by Pheu Thai, which excluded Move Forward and both military parties. Practically speaking, it might be difficult, but there are enough seats for that to happen. Alternatively, it's possible the two military parties try to put together a minority government. I don't know that that would survive. So in a sense, it's going to be quite challenging if Pheu Thai's candidate is blocked on the 27th.
Professor, I appreciate it's a difficult question to ask you, but what do you see happening over the next week ahead of the third vote?
Well, I think that Pheu Thai will do its best to assess the chances of its candidate and winning a victory. Pheu Thai is in a very difficult position here because they could easily get their candidate through if they just shifted the coalition, dropped Move Forward, and added whichever other parties it chose to add. There'd be no problem getting its prime minister candidate through. But the difficulty they face is they lost a lot of seats in the last parliament to Move Forward, precisely because people were afraid they'd cut a deal with the military parties. And so if they now cut a deal with the military parties, sure, they can form a government in the short term, but over the longer term, their voter support base could erode quite dramatically.
Fascinating to keep an eye on. Thank you for explaining your thoughts with us, Associate Professor James Ockey there from the University of Canterbury.